Recording in progress.
Check.
Oh, testing.
Uh-oh, she said she's frozen. All right, try it.
Testing.
Good on her end.
We're ready to start, or is she good on her end?
I'll give her another time.
Testing, testing.
Is the mic on? Can you tell?
It doesn't say mute on there.
Okay. Let me check it. No, someone else is saying anything.
Yeah, few people saying they can hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
For those that can hear, we are just getting set up. So those of us who are viewing this in person, we are making sure they have audio. So if you can just bear with us while we get that set up, we will get started soon.
Yeah, the panelists can hear. It's just in the country center. So it's not us.
Should we get started?
She said to hold on.
Okay. We're getting close. We're just building the anticipation. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Okay, Lucy, go ahead. I'm just going to mic you from my phone.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll get started then. So thank you all for coming either in person or virtually to our next installation of Brookgreen U. This is Welcome to the South, a primer for transplant gardeners. My name is Lucy Contreras. I'm the Assistant Manager of Plant Collections. I know it's a mouthful. Sometimes I forget my title midway through, but I'm so happy to have everyone here today to get to know a little bit about gardening here in South Carolina. So who here is a transplant? I know this one can be a little stoled or doesn't have the same impact when we are digital, but I'm a transplant and I'm assuming most of you here with us today are too. And I didn't make the term, but that's what the term is for people who are from a different area or part of the country and have moved to a new area. We have transplanted here, which is a perfect term for those of us in the plant community, especially. So a lot of this will be from my perspective as someone from the north and what I've experienced as a transplant. But I know not everyone is from the north, of course. Some of you are from the south and from the west too, so that's fine. But that's what unites us all here today. So we'll start with some of the basics first. And first thing you want to know is what your zone is. And here in the Brookgreen area, we're zone 8B, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. We also want to know our cultural conditions, and we want to know about our soil. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about all of these different things. But no matter where you are, if you are here in South Carolina, if you're in North Dakota, if you're in New York, it doesn't matter. These are all the basics you want to know no matter where you are. And sorry, I also meant to say at the beginning, if anyone has questions, even though this is a different format, you can feel free to write them in the chat and they will be asked at the end. And some of those questions might be answered throughout the presentation, but feel free to use that chat option to ask your questions. Anyway, back to our presentation. So what's a zone? Zones have to do with where you are physically, and they are by the USDA. And there's cold hardiness zones, which is what we typically see and refer to. And there are heat hardiness zones. And again, while they exist, they are not something that you commonly see. So if you see something listed for a plant zones 3 to 8, it's typically cold hardiness. If it's heat hardiness, it's then said heat hardiness zones. So what we want to find is something that falls into our zone 8 area. And they break up the zones even a little bit more with 8A and 8B, but pretty much just know you're in zone 8, and just be a little more specific, you're 8B. So cultural conditions. And again, it doesn't matter where you are, you want to know what your cultural conditions are. And that talks about your light. Do you have shade? How much do you have of each? You want to know about your soil. Is it wet? Is it dry? Does it drain? Are you having things that are impacting your light conditions? And that could be a tree, a neighboring house. You also have something called microclimate. So if you plant something close to your house, that area will typically stay, at least in the winter, a little bit warmer than something planted further away. So you want to take into account all those different things when you're planning for your garden. Again, soil conditions, just to look this a little bit more in depth, because there's something here that was a little unique from where I came from, and that's called gumbo. And that is pretty much, it's like I said, it's your worst nightmare. That is pretty much the sticky clay soil that you encounter when you're digging. And that was like nothing I had experienced until I moved down here. It is a tough thing to deal with, and you'll probably find that as you're dealing with your soil too. You also want to know, in general, is your soil drain well? Is it sandy? Is it clay? And like I said, unfortunately for most of us, we're going to find that maybe the top foot of our soil is a pretty decent soil. And then once you get about a foot below, you're going to find that gumbo. And there are things that we can do to kind of work around that issue. We can build up our beds. We can plant plants that work in that soil. So even if you have gumbo, don't despair. We'll get through this. And now we have some bad news. It wasn't just the gumbo. But one thing that you're going to find as a transplant is you can't grow everything that you used to grow back home. Again, for me, that was back up north. And I came in with the notion that I can grow everything I grew back up north, things that I grew as annuals, I can grow as perennials, and I have it all. And unfortunately, that is not the case, even though, again, for me, coming from a cooler climate, plants in that area thrived in that climate. So one thing that I have learned here is that a lot of plants, well, not a lot of plants, but some plants don't take the heat quite so well, or the humidity. So that's something that I've learned, and you will probably also experience as you bring some of your old time favorites down and see what works and what doesn't. So some plants that I've personally had to bid farewell to are things like lilacs, firs, and yews. So, you know, just a little sad saying goodbye to some old friends, which brings us to our next point. As I said in Dante's Inferno, abandon hope, all ye who enter here. No way, we are good. Don't even worry about it. Even though there's some plants that, again, you will not be able to grow down here, there's a ton that you can, and you are going to be able to expand your plant palette, which is fun, getting used to seeing new plants and experiencing them in your gardens. So one thing I said before, I thought coming down here, I'd be able to grow annuals as perennials, and to an extent, some of those I can. Things like Tibicina or Glory Bush work that way, Lantana. For some of them, there are still some that even here, we're a little too cold for them. Things like cannas are another thing that we're able to grow down here as perennials. So there is a lot of fun with that. Plus, again, if you're from the north, you're from a colder climate, we have an extended growing season, everyone. We have both a warm and a cool growing season. And where I was from, we did our warm season display, and then we set our bulbs for the following year, but we had really not much going on in the garden during the winter. But here we do have color through the cool season, and we'll look at that a little bit later. So just to meet your new growing seasons a little bit more. Like I said, with our cool season, you can grow during that time, and it's not just cabbage, which is neat. But we have a lot of great options, and some you are probably even familiar with. For our warm season, we have things like zinnias, angelonias, which are known as summer snapdragons, and begonias. For our cool seasons, we do have great color options. We have, like I said, we do have vegetables. We do have things like cabbage and kale, but there's a whole lot more out there, and we are going to take a closer look. So let's start with our warm season. At Brookgreen, we tend to start planting our annuals for our warm season at the end of March, beginning of April. What we do is we also look at the weather forecast, which I encourage everyone to do, because even though that's typically our last frost date, the weather's weird here. You've probably noticed that. We don't typically get snow. We got snow last week. So always look at your weather forecast and see if it looks like there's some unseasonably cold weather coming, then just hold off on planting. Another thing you want to keep in mind is that the weather is hotter here. So plants that maybe did well up north, it doesn't mean that all of them won't do well here. We had something that we found we're very excited about. We grow Aquilegia or columbine, and up north we grow that in the full sun. Down here we put it in some shade, and it loves it. It's up all year round, at least for its foliage. The flowers are beautiful in the spring. So we have been able to do a little tinkering to find out what works. So we'll look at some annuals that have been really great performers for us here in the gardens. And we'll start with sun annuals that we love for the warm season. This is called cat whiskers. And as you can see from the flowers, they definitely have that whisker-like feel to them. They are an oddity that people just love to see. We have Angelonia or summer snapdragon. This is always a wonderful performer for us. I love this plant. We have zinnias. There are so many different kinds that look so many different ways, so many different colors. People just cannot believe that some zinnias they're looking at are in fact zinnias. This is Emperor's Candlestick, and Jamie, who is on our horticulture staff, is also featured in this picture. She's 5'2", but you can see the Emperor's Candlestick behind her is towering over her. It probably gets about 6 feet tall. And again, this is an annual for us in this area. It doesn't survive our winter. So that's just one season's growth. So you can have some pretty impressive plants. And we also have another fan favorite here in the gardens at our plant sales is Globe Amaranth. It is a funky, whimsical looking plant. We love to put it in the garden. It's tough. And then of course we have shade annuals. We have Impatience. We have Terenia or wishbone flower. We love this one. It's another really tough plant, and people they'll despair a bit. Say, oh, I can't really get flowers in the shade. What kind of plants are there? And there are still plenty of good options. The Terenia has a bunch of different colors that it comes in. You can accessorize with them. We have things like Persian shield, which it's hard to beat that foliage. It just looks like it's metallic and shining. It's a really wonderful addition to any garden. Begonias, and of course, Coleus. I'm sure everyone was waiting for that to come on through. And we'll look at some plants for our cool season. And when we start planting for our cool season, it's typically in October. And again, which you'll just hear me saying throughout, which you've already heard me saying throughout, is as a former New Yorker, as someone from the North, I typically think, okay, it's September, break out the flannel. It's time for fall. And that is really not the case here. When it is September here, it is still in the 90s, it is still hot. And that's something I've been here for 6 years and I still cannot come to terms with that. But whether or not I can come to terms with it, the facts are the facts. It's still hot in September. So when we do our cool season plantings, we typically do those around October when it is truly, and not just what I want, but truly starting to get a little bit cooler. And even though it does get chilly, there are plenty of hardy plants that can survive our winters. And it's not uncommon for us to go into the 20s. And sometimes we can even go a little lower than that. But most of the plants that we use can withstand that. And if they can't, then we just don't use them for very long. They might just be a pop of color at the beginning of our cool season change out or at the end. So let's take a look at some of those cool season annuals that we really like. This is Arctotis, or blue-eyed African daisy. This has been a home run for us. I cannot stop singing the praises of this plant. This has some true blue flowers, which is very hard to find in the plant world. You'll see flowers that are labeled as being blue and they're purple, but this really does have that true blue with the just really warm center outlining it. So we love this. The foliage is silver. It's got an interesting form to it. And the other really great point about this is that the deer don't like it. So that makes us love it even more. We have calendulas, or pot marigolds. These have huge, really beautiful flowers. Unfortunately, I do have deer come by and bite the heads off, but they don't seem to favor them too much. So we're happy for that. This is another somewhat recent addition that we've added to our roster of cool season plants, and this is called monkey flower. The flowers on there, the shape of them is unique, the color is unique. They're a low-growing plant, so they do tend to spread a little bit. They are a little bit delicate, so if you step on them, they're not going to be too happy. They're probably going to break, but if you don't have a lot of foot traffic, or you can plant them draping over a pot or in an area where they're not going to get much mechanical damage, they're another home run. They are great. Snapdragon's a classic. We have them. And foxgloves. People always love to see this. They're always so surprised because you probably get, depending on the cultivar, cultivated variety, 4 or 5 feet tall. In the spring, they're just a burst of color. We love using these. And they don't really do anything until the spring flower-wise, but with the show they put on, it is absolutely worth the wait. And yes, let's talk about veggies because that is an option and something we use pretty heartily in the cool season. So we have Chinese mustard. This one is called Red Giant. And again, just like that Strobilanthes or that Persian shield, the purple on these leaves, just it's so metallic looking. So it's hard to believe that, no, this isn't edible, but it's also a great addition to your garden. We have Swiss chard. This is called Bright Lights. And if you look at the petioles, which is pretty much the part of the plant that connects the leaf to the rest of the plant, you can see they're different colors. And we love that. We have bronze fennel. This one provides such a different texture to the gardens. A lot of what we look at is a coarser texture with these leaves, especially with these vegetables, because the leaves are so thick and big. But this bronze fennel has very fern-like lacy leaves. So we love that. And the color is hard to beat too. We have another Chinese mustard. This one is called Green Wave. And of course, I said it, there's cabbage, there's kale. So we do have this flowering kale called Crane White. And this one's really unique because it grows on a very tall upright stem. And you'll occasionally see these used in flower arrangements because even though they are not grown for their flowers, the shape of the plant itself does kind of resemble a flower. So what about perennials? Now, there is a lot that you grew back home that some of which you can take here. So again, we can have some of that overlap. We do have, as I said, some annuals that will be perennials because they are hardy here as opposed to when they were tender back home. And then the tropical look. So we have plenty of plants here that look tropical, but they survive our winter. So it's a home run. So let's take a look at some of those. We'll talk first about this. So from again, my standpoint of someone who grew up on Long Island, New York, Zone 7, there are still some things from back home that I can grow. So I'm very happy to be able to include those. Some of those things are roses. And I've heard people say before, oh, you can't grow roses in the South. Well, not that I hate to break it to you. I'm happy to break it to you. You can. There are a few types that do better than others. So I wanted to tell you about those. Tea roses are one of those. And I don't know why the rose people did this, why they couldn't come up with any other word. But tea roses are actually different than hybrid tea roses. And a lot of times people will use those interchangeably. Tea roses seem to do very well for us here. And yes, there are some hybrid tea roses that also do well for us, but I would just look at the teas. China roses, rugosas, and noisettes. And noisettes were actually created in Charleston. So that's another thing when people say, you can't grow roses in the South. I'm like, we have a rose that came from the South. It came right from Charleston. So definitely want to look into those. There are still some conifers, because as I said earlier, firs and yews, we don't really have luck with growing down here, but there's still plenty of conifers that you can grow. Things like junipers and bald cypress, they're longleaf pines. So don't despair, you can still get your conifers. Japanese maples, I know where I was from, I would see Japanese maples everywhere, and you can still grow them here. There are different cultivars out there. Again, that's a cultivated variety. Some of them will take more sun, others prefer a little more shade. So you just want to look into that before you decide what to plant. Butterfly bushes, people love them. They still do well here. And we will take a look at some of those plants in picture form. So this is a rugosa rose. It's white, it's so fragrant. It really it makes the garden smell amazing. Highly recommend. We have this butterfly bush. This one is called honeycomb. It's a yellow. It grows very quickly. We planted one in a 4-inch pot, and this thing has probably grown 4 feet tall by 4 feet wide in a season. It just really likes to have that sun. Our Japanese maples, of course, this one's glowing embers. It does very well for us here. And then, like I said, some juniper. So this one's called All Gold. We have it in our dwarf conifer collection, and it has just spread. It is a low growing one, but it is vibrant in the landscape, especially in the winter where you're looking for something to brighten up your landscape. This is a great choice. Now let's talk about some perennials. So some samplings of perennials that we probably grew back home. You can also carry over here. We have coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, Lenten rose or hellebores, daylilies, hostas, salvias, and there's so many different kinds of salvias. So I will say there are some salvias that will work and there are some salvias that won't, but there are plenty of overlap. And we'll take a look at some of those pictures. So this is a daylily. This one's called Brookgreen Plantation. We have in our daylily walk, a very generous donation was given to us by the Georgetown Daylily Society, and they do breeding there. So that's why you'll see some daylilies with very regionally specific names like Brookgreen Plantation. This is a salvia. This is called Black and Blue. This is an echinacea. This is powwow white. This one flowers prolifically. It's really beautiful. This is a Lenten rose or hellebore. And these are starting to actually flower now. So if you come to the gardens, look down, because this flower, you'd think it's very hard to miss, but it's actually only maybe 6 inches off the ground, and it kind of hangs its head low. So keep an eye around the gardens everywhere when you come through. We have hostas. This one is called Halcyon. And the one thing I'll say, I was almost a little hesitant to put hostas on because our hostas get eaten up by deer. They are arguably one of their most favorite foods, but I know that at home I don't have a deer problem. And I'm sure for many of you watching, you probably don't all have deer problems. So if you don't have deer, hostas are a great plant to think about. But if you do, I would recommend almost anything besides hostas. They love them. And then we have Rebecca or Black-eyed Susan. This one's called Gold Sturm. And one thing that I've read and I've witnessed here too is that dragonflies really like to be around Rebecca or Black-eyed Susan. So when I see these flowering in the poetry garden, there is just swarms of dragonflies, which is wonderful. And I always say, go and eat the mosquitoes. Come on a little closer to me. So they are definitely a good plant to consider. So let's talk about some annuals turned perennials. And again, some of them. We can't get out all of them, but some. So lantanas, elephant ears or taro, they're called colocasia, cannas, Persian shield. And I know that we looked at Persian shield as an annual, and we'll discuss that a little further. Begonias, princess flower, glory bush, that's Vicina. And just like I was saying with that Persian shield, siting makes a big difference. Where you put these plants can be the determining factor as to whether or not these will survive the winter or not. So when we talked about microclimates a little bit earlier, planting closer to the house where it still has some heat from the house that can help make that bed a little bit warmer, that can make a difference for things like the Persian shield. So let's take a look. Good on me. I had 2 pictures of Persian shield, so you don't have to see the same one over again. This is lantana. This one's called red spread. And lantanas have so many different flower colors. They're a really nice plant to keep in mind. This is colocasia or elephant's ear. This one is called a lustrous. And this is a baby wing begonia. So we want to get that tropical feel that will last. So like we said, we want perennials that are also going to look tropical. So of course we have our cabbage palmetto or sable palmetto, pedicum or ginger lily. We have our shell ginger or alpinia. And I always think this one is just so tropical looking. So many of these are tropical looking, but this one just blows me away. We have sago palms, and with sago palms, they're actually something called a cycad. They're not a true palm. So in the evolutionary world of horticulture and plants, these are actually pretty old, prehistoric. So they are neat to see. They do look like a palm, and they do give you that tropical feel, but that's just a little something you can have at trivia. And then this is a kunti palm, which is also a cycad like our sago palms. And of course, you've come to the South, you probably want to have some classically Southern plants. Part of the appeal of moving to a new area is kind of taking on that culture. And one thing that I remember coming here from New York was it was very strange to me that everybody waved and said hi. I'm like, I don't know you. Why are you waving at me? Why are you saying hello? But it's just the culture down here is very welcoming, very friendly culture. And you know, I know when my parents were moving down and waving at people, and people looking at them who were also transplants were giving them a weird look, like, why are these people waving at me? I don't know them, but we've really, a lot of us embrace that culture, and why not? It's a wonderful part of it. But we also tend to want to embrace it in our landscapes. So looking at some classically Southern plants you might want to think about including are things like Camellias, Hydrangeas, Crepe Myrtles, Cabbage Palmettos, Azaleas. So we'll start with our Camellias. And there are a few different kinds that you can grow. So we're going to start with Japanese camellias, because this is typically what you see the most. And these are the ones that are flowering now. They're typically winter flowering. And there's a lot of cultivars. Again, there's that word, cultivated varieties, that are out there. So they have different shaped flowers and different colors, but typically those colors are red, pinks, and whites. We have Cesanqua camellias, which I would say maybe the second most popular that you see. And these ones are typically late fall flowering. They are just before those japonicas, and in the botanical world, there's always exceptions. You know, I will never say anything absolute, because there'll always be that one obscure exception that just pops up. So typically speaking, one of the ways you can tell these flowers apart is the Cesanqua flowers have a little bit of fragrance to them. And the leaves on the Cesanquas are a little smaller than the leaves on the japonicas. And I say, whenever I say this all the time, you maybe have come to a talk with me before, that's helpful. But if you only have one plant, you can't really tell which leaf is bigger or smaller. And this is an issue that I have sometimes in plant records when I'm trying to figure out what a plant is, and the information is, oh, well, this one has a smaller leaf than the other species. And I say, well, I only have one, so that doesn't help me. But it is good information to have. So just like our japonicas, you have a lot of different cultivars with this too, a lot of different shaped flowers, but again, often what you'll find are reds, pinks, and whites. The last camellia that you will see, again, just doing that broad stroke, are the tea camellias or Camellia sinensis. And these tend to flower in mid-fall. They have small white flowers, and you could know you were passing by one of these because it sounds like the plant is vibrating because there's so many bees on there just buzzing. They love it. And this is, again, tea camellia. This is used to make tea. I don't know how, but there are parts of this plant that are used for making tea. So we'll take a look at some Japanese camellias. This one is Carter's Sunburst. This one is Cleve James Variegated, Dorothy Chester, and Debutante. And if you haven't been to Brookgreen, or maybe you have before and don't know, we do have a camellia walk. And now is the time to walk through because we do have a lot of japonicas out there. It is a great time to see our camellias, both in the camellia walk and in the gardens flowering. We have Camellia Cesanqua. This one is Orchid October Magic, Midi no Yuke, Jean May, and Cleopatra. And then just a little look at our Camellia sinensis. This one that you see right here with the yellow on the leaves is a cultivar called Yellow Tea. Typically the leaves, unless you have a cultivar, are green, but this one's a little more spunky, so I want to show you. And then these are the flowers. Like I said, they're pretty small, but they are big attractor to the bees. So let's look at hydrangeas. And again, we have a few different ones that we're going to look at. Our first is the big leafer florist hydrangeas. And this is what, at least I think, the classic large flowered type. It also has big leaves. They have two different flower types. Either you have your mop head, which I always say it kind of looks like a bouquet. It looks like a complete bouquet right there. It's a big bunch of flowers, or lace cap, which is a little more delicate looking. Typically, these are best in shade to part shade. And pruning time is important with hydrangeas. You want to know old wood versus new wood. So pretty much what that means is some plants will flower on old wood, which means they set their flowers pretty soon after they do their original flowering. They'll set their flower buds for the next year. It's usually like a month or two after. And then some flower on new wood, which means they just set their flower buds shortly before they actually flower. So when you prune, you want to make sure you prune at the right time, because if you have something that flowers on old wood and you prune 6 months after it's flowered, then you are probably going to be taking off that flower bud and you will not have many flowers to see when it actually is flowering time. If you do it on new wood, then you're fine. You can pretty much prune whenever. If you see big flower buds on there, you might not want to prune that off, but you would just want to look, because there are some cultivars that prune on old wood, some prune on, set their buds on old wood, some set their buds on new wood, some set their buds on both. So you just want to look that up before you go pruning. And if you don't know what it flowers on, old wood or new wood, I would just err on the side of caution and prune as if it is old wood. The next one we want to look at is our oak leaf hydrangea. And this is a native plant, which is great. We get to help our native fauna with this plant. So it's a good one to plant. It's also really pretty. So these flowers are large and conical, and the foliage is oak shaped. This is also one that's best in shade to part shade, and this one flowers on old wood. So we want to prune after it flowers. Then we have panicle hydrangeas. And these flowers are a similar shape to our oak leaf hydrangeas, in that they're like a cone panicle shape as well. These actually can take a little more sun, so you don't have to have all hydrangeas in the shade. And these typically flower on new wood, so you can prune them whenever. Again, I don't like to speak in absolutes because there always seem to be some exceptions here and there. So I would recommend keep your plant labels when you plant, so that way you know what you have, and then go online and you're pretty easily able to get information on when to prune these. So let's take a look at some. So these are our big leafer florist hydrangeas, a couple we have in the gardens. This one's called Let's Dance Rave. This is Endless Summer. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of that one before. This is Double Delight's Wedding Gown. And this is, I don't speak French. I took one semester, didn't go well, so forgive me. Butte Vendemois. Don't know if I said it right, my apologies. So we'll take a look at oak leaf hydrangeas. There are some cultivars out there, but I just put in our straight species, and it is really pretty, which says straight species. We have that oak shaped foliage, and we have those big panicle flowers. Our panicle hydrangeas, this is called Limelight. This is Chantilly Lace, and this is Firelight. So let's talk crepe myrtles. Everybody loves crepe myrtles. We have a ton of these in the gardens. People have them all over in new developments. So let's take a look at them. So this is a plant that has 4-season interest. And pretty much what that means is any time of year, you're going to find something attractive about this plant. Obviously the bark, I don't know if you can really tell from this picture, but if you look at the bark on the plants, they are exfoliating. So there's different color to them, which provides some interest. The flowers in the summer are very attractive. The foliage is nice. The full color is nice. So you always have something with crepe myrtles that makes it a great sight to see. They are a staple in so many communities. They are easy to find, which makes it easy to be able to get to your house if you wanted it. And they're a tough plant. They're pretty low maintenance. So you don't need to worry about, oh, I have to spray this. I have to give it special treatment. It's pretty much like the crock pot, set it and forget it. It's a very nice plant to be able to have. And fortunately, it doesn't really have many pest problems. I have heard about a new pest that has started to go for crepe myrtles, but I have not heard of it in our area. So again, we are very fortunate that there isn't really any issue with crepe myrtles for us. And there are also tree forms and shrub forms available. So you have options. But there's one thing about crepe myrtles. Don't be a murderer. So I am stealing from The Shining. And as tempting as it may be to go and top these plants, that is a term that we in the South call crepe murder. So let's talk crepe murder. And I took some pictures from around to kind of show you, but this is what crepe murder looks like. And what that is people will go and just top the trees. And it's a very commonly seen practice here. A lot of people do it, but typically it's not what is encouraged in the horticultural community, but you will see this everywhere. You will see this at your neighbor's house. You will see this along the shopping centers. It's everywhere, but it's, again, not typically advised. And what people are doing is they're topping this tree. And what happens is over time, you keep cutting the same area, it starts to kind of callus over, and you have these angry fists that the crepe myrtle is giving, but they tend to sucker or send out new stems. So you have all of these new stems coming out, which you can see in the picture that has foliage, not the Christmas lights. And with those stems, they will get flowers on them. These stems are usually not very strong because they are probably, I don't know if a lot of you went to school at the same time I did, but you had the teacher with the pointer that he or she may also slam on the desk for some motivation, but they are about that thickness. So they're not super strong. They do break. It's not the best thing for the plant. It is putting some undue stress. So when we prune our crepe myrtles, we prune it to a point that I would say kind of connects to the tree. And that might sound like obviously it's all connected to the tree, but if you have a branch that comes out off of the main stem, we will go and prune it there versus just topping it at any arbitrary point. So again, people do this. It's not going to kill the tree, but aesthetically, it may not be exactly what you want. And again, for the overall health of the tree, it's not the greatest thing. But again, totally, it's your call. You can do what you like with it, but not how we typically prune it in the industry. So the next thing we're going to look at is cabbage palmettos or sable palmetto. And this is our state tree. And that's great because we see people planting it all over the place. And it's a wonderful addition. It's a native plant too. So it's great to be able to include that into our landscapes. When you prune this, and I'll see a lot of people pruning, and they tend to get a little prune heavy, not quite to the extent of the crepe myrtles, but still a little heavy handed. And the way to prune this is to prune to the horizon. And what that means is you just don't want to take anything lower than where the horizon point or that horizontal line would be. If you have dead fronds on there, which is just another term for what the leaves are on a palm, you can take those off. But if you have anything that has green on it or predominantly green on it, you want to leave that. Plants, as many of you probably know, they get their energy from photosynthesis. And I'll see a lot of people when they prune it, they leave one little frond kind of waving at you. And that's not a lot of photosynthetic material for the plant to be able to go and feed itself. So You want to make sure you don't take too much off, but just a little bit. And of course, we're looking at this. This is hardy in our area. Again, it's a native plant, and it's perfect for giving you that classically Southern look. People love to have palms in their yards. There are other palms out there. There's the dwarf palmetto, which is another native, the European fan palm, and also the saw palmetto. Let's look at azaleas. So we have a few that we grow here. The Southern Indigo azaleas, I think, are probably what most people think of when they come. It's that classic evergreen azalea that gets its color over in the spring. And I know everyone wants to know, well, when are they going to flower? And unfortunately, we don't have that answer. We typically tell people in April, but it is something that depends on the weather. If it's been really cold, that might push it back. If it's been really warm, that might push it forward. So unfortunately, we don't know exactly when. I wish we did. It'd make it easier for all of us. We also have deciduous azaleas, and deciduous just means a plant that drops its leaves. So when you think of a tree in the fall that dropped its leaves, of course, there are plenty of evergreens, but that's, I think, an easier example. So these deciduous azaleas do include some natives. And I would say these flowers are a little funkier looking than our larger flowering azaleas like those indicas. And these are usually early spring bloomers. And then there's, of course, reblooming azaleas. And those are things like Encore Azaleas, which many of you probably already heard of, and Bloomathon azaleas. So let's look at some of our Southern Indigos. This is George Lindley Tabor, and this is Formosa. And then some of our deciduous azaleas. Like I said, I think the flowers are a little funky on them, but I love it. I love funky flowers. This is a mountain azalea, which is native. Don't let the common name confuse you. Common names can be misleading. So even though we are a flat area by the coast, it's still a native plant to our area, to South Carolina. This is three-leafed azalea. And this is an Okani azalea, which is another native one. And then, of course, we have reblooming azaleas. And again, this is an Encore azalea called Autumn Embers, and another Encore azalea called Autumn Lily. And let's talk about gardening with native plants. Since you're in a new area, you have a new list of native plants that you can play with. So then people say, well, why do I want to grow native plants? Native plants are ugly. They don't flower nicely. It just looks like weeds. But I'm here to tell you that they don't all look like weeds. There are plenty of native plants that are very pretty. And there is more that they can do for the landscape too, and just for nature. So they do help support native fauna, which is pretty much just animals. They do well here because they're actually from here. They're used to our environment. So they don't really need to have very much chemical input like fungicides or other sorts of pesticides because they're used to growing here. One thing I will say about native plants is since they do support fauna, so things like animals and insects, it's not uncommon to see the leaves being chewed on because that is what the insects are eating. So you want to have a bit of a threshold, a bit of a tolerance there for some of that damage that you might see on them. Let's look at some native plants to consider for sun to part sun, and this is some woody ones to start us off. This is a bald cypress. This is a cultivar called Falling Waters. This is Ilex vomitoria or Yopon holly. Kosteletsky or seashore mallow. It's a beautiful flower. This is a parsley hawthorn, and in the spring it is amazing. It is just covered in these flowers. It's hard not to notice, and the bark on that tree is also really attractive. And then, of course, our southern magnolia. This is a cultivar called Little Gem. So this is a dwarf variety, and I always tell people don't get too hung up on the fact that it's called a dwarf variety. This probably still gets about 30 to 40 feet tall, so you don't want to plant it right next to your house, but it is shorter than just a straight species of Magnolia grandiflora. All right, so we'll look some woody plants for shade to part shade that are native. This is witch hazel. I love witch hazel. It is such a neat plant. These are the flowers that happen in the late fall. This is a serviceberry. Our hydrangea, corsifolia or oak leaf hydrangea, and eastern redbud. Now we can look at some perennials that are native for the sun and part sun. This is Appalachian mountain mint. I'm sorry, the picture is so small. This is maypop or purple passion flower. This is scarlet rose mallow or Texas star. This is Robin's plantain. This is a swamp sunflower, which is absolutely gorgeous. And this is butterfly weed or Asclepias. And like we said before, when you're planting native plants, and especially when people are planting butterfly weed, they're planting them because they want the monarchs to come. They want the butterflies to come. They're trying to attract them. So when you are planting, especially for butterflies, you are going to have your plant eaten. So I know sometimes people come out and say, oh my goodness, what happened to my plants? They're all eaten, they're all gone. Well, that's part of the plan. That's how you're going to get the monarchs. That's how you're going to get the caterpillars. So you have to go in with that knowledge so you don't get nervous, because you definitely, if you are planting for butterflies or for other wildlife, you definitely don't want to put insecticide on there, or else you are going to wind up killing that wildlife. So that's again why you have to go in with a little bit of a threshold or tolerance for damage on the plant, and just have an idea or a plan of why you're growing it for. If you are truly growing it just to be ornamental, you don't want things eating it, then you might want to go that route of discouraging insects and other fauna. But if you are growing it to encourage them, just know that going in, you will have some damage on the leaves. So native plants to consider: perennials for the shade to part shade. This is a native fern called the southern maiden fern. This is Indian Pinks by Gilia. So pretty. It's another funky looking plant. This is sensitive fern. It's so small back there, but that's called golden ragwort. I love this. This is called little brown jug. And this is another one that grows really close to the ground, but if you go and push the leaves back, the flowers look like little brown jugs. It's really neat. And then this is called lizard's tail. So where can you go to get more information once we're done here today? And of course, if you're me, where to shop? So Brookgreen Gardens, obviously, shameless self-promotion. Our Brookgreen News, which you're watching today, thank you. Our Brookgreen blogs have a lot of information there. I write a lot of our horticulture ones, so again, just shameless self-promotion. And of course, our Brookgreen plant database, where we try to get pictures and information about the plants that we have. Clemson Extension is wonderful. That's who does the Master Gardener program. They have a lot of great information out there. The South Carolina Native Plant Society has a lot of really good information. And they tend to, with their meetings, lately they've been doing them through Zoom. They've been available on their Facebook page. So they have a lot of great speakers, so a lot that you can learn from them. But yeah, let's get to the shopping, right? So our Brookgreen plant sale is, again, just this shameless self-promotion, but I'm here for it. So of course, our plant sales, and this is where you'll see some of the things that we spoke about today. And when you shop a public garden plant sale, you usually find more variety than you would at your big box store. So our spring plant sale, if you want to mark your calendars, hint, hint, is April 23rd. And then our fall plant sale is tentatively September 24th. Outside of our plant sales, because unfortunately they're only 2 times a year, you can go to Inlet Culinary Garden, which is just right down the road from us. They have a wonderful selection of different plants and pollinator plants. Bottle Tree Gardening is in McClellanville. They have a great selection of, again, pollinator plants and also native plants if you want to go that route. And a couple of online vendors to look at is Woodlanders and Nurseries Caroliniana. So I highly encourage you to look at them. So thank you all. Happy gardening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Can you plant Lenten rose now?
Can you plant Lenten rose now? You can. We're very fortunate in our climate that we can plant a lot of things right now in the winter. With my volunteers, we just planted some roses this week. We're really lucky. Our ground doesn't typically freeze. So yes, you can put Lenten rose in now.
Endless summer hydrangea. Mine hated the sun, so I moved it to partial shade, but not sure if I should cut it back.
Okay, so the question was, endless summer hydrangea, had it in the sun, didn't like it, moved it to the shade, not sure if you should cut it back. I don't think you need to if it looks like the plant is struggling. And I guess also, if you feel like you lost a lot of roots while you were digging it out and moving it, then yes, I would actually say cut off some of the roots. But if you moved it and it's this time of year where things are cooler, then you can probably get away with not cutting it. And I tell people, let the plant reveal to you. Again, in the winter, it's not going to reveal that much, but as it starts to leaf out again, it will show you which areas maybe did have dieback, and that's not going to be uncommon. So don't freak out if you see some dieback on your plant. But if you cut it back now, you will lose the flowers. It may make the transition a little bit easier. So if you're willing not to have those flowers this year, then you can cut it back. So I know it's kind of a lot of like, yes, you can, no, you can't, but short answer, I don't think you have to. If you definitely want to have flowers, don't do it. But if you are willing to sacrifice the flowers for a year, it might make the transition a little bit easier to take a little bit off.
Where to have soil tested?
Where to have your soil tested. So you're going to head over to the Clemson Extension and you can go right to their website. I actually just wrote a blog about this for site preparation for starting a new garden, and I linked exactly where to go. But if you go and type into a search engine and you write soil testing Clemson Extension, that will bring you there. It will tell you how to go about doing that, and they will do your soil testing for a modest fee.
How well do iris grow here?
How well do iris grow here? It depends on the iris. There are Louisiana iris, which are a little bit more of a water iris, and they tend to do pretty well for us. We've had bearded iris before that have done well. So I haven't had bad experiences with iris here. We also have an iris that is flowering now called a snake's head iris, Iris tuberosa, which is maybe a little bit more of a garden oddity than one that you would grow for big displays, but typically we found the irises do well. But you just want to find out if your iris is a water iris or if your iris is one that wants more of a well-drained soil. And if you're looking for a good garden to see irises in Sumter, there is the Swan Lake Iris Gardens, and I believe most of their irises are water irises.
Will peonies grow here?
Will peonies grow here? Oh, the great debate. When I moved down here, the house that we bought in Myrtle Beach had peonies planted. They were at the lowest point in full sun, and that was where all the water collected. And I tell you, those things flowered. They looked wonderful. But a lot of people that I talk to in horticulture here in our area swear that they don't work here. So I've seen it with my own eyes, but I think getting the siting right is very difficult. So yes, it's possible, but it is very challenging.
You cut, is it lantana? Lantana.
Do we cut lantana? It depends where it's growing. You don't have to cut it, but we have some lantana that will come to, they're like cousin it, and they're just going to come and eat you. So we do have some of those that we cut back when they start to get unruly, but they can take it, but you don't need to cut it unless you kind of have that situation.
Those are all the questions.
Those are all the questions. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And
one more
question, Kevin. Keep them coming if you want.
How can you grow rhubarb and lemon balm?
Oh man. I wish we had Jamie. I don't know if I've seen rhubarb growing here, but we do have lemon balm, and I would recommend if you grow lemon balm to grow it in a container, because lemon balm is kind of like mint and it tends to take over. But we've grown lemon balm before in full sun in containers, and we've also had it in the ground, but it's been pretty easy, well-drained soil. But rhubarb, I do not have experience growing, so unfortunately I cannot answer that part. I'm sorry.
There's one more comment. Great info. Thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate you all coming by in person and digitally to come to this talk. I hope you all have a very happy garden, and thank you again.